If your car ran out of gas today, you'd drive to a station, pay, and drive off. In Soviet cities during the 1970s and 80s, that same simple errand sometimes meant slipping cash to a stranger in a parking lot instead, because economists who later studied the era estimated that somewhere between a third and two-thirds of all the gasoline used in Soviet cities was never sold through an official pump at all. In a country that supposedly planned every liter of fuel down to the last drop, a staggering share of it was just missing, sold off the books by the very drivers who were supposed to be delivering it. Here's the strange part. The Soviet government never admitted this, obviously. It was an economist in Berkeley, California, named Gregory Grossman, who first put a name to it. In 1977, he published a paper calling it the second economy, a term that stuck. The problem was, you can't exactly survey people living inside a police state and ask them how much they cheat the system. So Grossman and his colleagues at Berkeley and Duke did something clever instead. Starting in the late 1970s, they tracked down and interviewed over 1,000 households, more than 3,000 people, who had emigrated from the Soviet Union to the United States, people who were finally safe enough to actually tell the truth. Piece by piece, using those interviews, they reconstructed a shadow version of the Soviet economy that the state itself never published a single honest statistic about. By some of their later estimates, illegal economic activity alone made up more than a tenth of the entire country's national income by the mid-1980s, an economy roughly the size of a small industrialized nation operating entirely off the books, inside the most tightly planned economy on Earth. This wasn't just gasoline. It touched almost everything, because official Soviet stores never had enough of what people actually needed, so a second system grew up alongside the official one, built entirely on personal connections. Researchers later gave that system a name too: blat. Roughly translated, it means pull, or connections, and it worked like a favor bank. You didn't buy a sofa, you knew someone who worked at the furniture warehouse. You didn't get medicine, you knew a nurse who owed you one. Sociologist Alena Ledeneva, who studied this system in depth, described an entire hidden economy running on iOS, where trust between two people mattered more than the money in either of their pockets. Because the money, on its own, often couldn't actually buy anything. So where did the actual goods in this second economy come from? A lot of them came from men known as Chekhoviki, a word that roughly means workshop operators. These were people who quietly ran illegal factories, sometimes inside a corner of an official state factory, using stolen or diverted raw materials, producing things the planned economy simply refused to make enough of: real blue jeans, decent shoes, cigarettes, furniture. Since none of this could be reported to police who might arrest them, Chekhoviki instead struck deals with organized crime figures, the Vori v Zakone, or thieves-in-law, who provided protection in exchange for a cut, effectively taxing an entire shadow manufacturing sector that the state pretended didn't exist. By the 1980s, some of these organized crime networks had grown wealthy enough to rival actual state enterprises, built entirely on producing the consumer goods the government itself had failed to provide. This casual redistribution of state property wasn't limited to organized crime bosses and underground factory owners either. Ordinary workers openly described their own small-scale pilfering with a well-known saying, "You can't steal from the state. You can only take back what already belongs to everyone." Nurses walked home with spare bandages and medicine. Factory workers pocketed spare parts. Bakery employees left with extra bread under their coats. All of it was technically illegal, and all of it was treated by ordinary people as simple common sense, in an economy that never paid them enough through legal channels to actually live on. And people spent a genuinely enormous amount of their lives chasing what little the official economy did offer through legal means. Soviet citizens famously carried a mesh string bag called an avoska, loosely translating to just-in-case bag, folded up in a pocket or purse at all times, because you never knew when you might walk past a store that had unexpectedly received a shipment of something worth queuing for. People would join a line without even knowing what was being sold, on the simple logic that a line that long had to be for something worth having, and you could always ask the person in front of you once you got close enough to find out. This informal economy also operated inside living arrangements that made real privacy almost impossible to begin with. After the 1917 revolution, the Soviet government began seizing large apartments from wealthy families and subdividing them, cramming multiple unrelated families into what became known as a kommunalka, a communal apartment. By the mid-1960s, as many as 80% of Moscow residents were living this way, one family to a room, sharing a single kitchen and a single bathroom with strangers down the hall. It wasn't only about the housing shortage. Several historians studying the policy have pointed out that the arrangement conveniently put unrelated families in each other's business around the clock, which made it considerably easier for at least one person in every kommunalka to end up reporting on the rest. The state's tolerance for all this quiet, off-the-books dealing had very real limits, and in 1961, two young currency traders found out exactly where that limit was. Ian Rokotov and Vladislav Faibishenko ran a ring buying and reselling foreign currency and gold coins to tourists and diplomats, precisely the kind of second economy hustle the Soviet system generated constantly but never officially acknowledged. When they were caught, they were sentenced to 15 years in prison, already the maximum the existing law allowed. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev reportedly toured an exhibit of their confiscated cash and gold coins and, in a fit of anger, declared that they should be shot. There was only one problem. No law on the books at the time allowed a death sentence for this crime, so within weeks, the Soviet government created one and then applied it retroactively, reaching back onto a case that had already been tried and sentenced. Rokotov and Faibishenko were shot in July of 1961. They were 22 years old. That wasn't a one-time overreaction either. 2 decades later, in 1982, a deputy minister of fisheries named Vladimir Rytov was executed for smuggling millions of dollars worth of caviar to the West, part of a broader anti-corruption campaign under Soviet leader Yuri Andropov. By 1987, historians estimate more than 6,000 people had been executed for economic crimes since that 1961 precedent was set. Working the black market wasn't a technicality in the Soviet Union. For some people, it was a capital offense, applied unevenly for decades. So what did all of this actually mean for someone just trying to live an ordinary life? It meant existing inside 2 economies running at the same time. The official one, with its empty shelves and fixed prices that rarely matched what anything was actually worth, and the unofficial one running quietly underneath it, that the entire country genuinely depended on to keep functioning, while the state periodically reminded everyone, sometimes with an execution, that it could still end your life for participating in it. You didn't need to be a smuggler or a Chekhovik to feel this. You needed it just to fix your car, furnish your apartment, or get proper medicine for your kid. The Soviet Union didn't survive in spite of people quietly breaking its own rules. In a lot of well-documented ways, it survived as long as it did, because they did. This is episode 3. Next up, what it was actually like living as an ordinary person in ancient Rome. Subscribe if you want to catch it, and if you're enjoying this pattern of official history versus how people actually got by underneath it, a like genuinely helps.